sometimes it's just one plant, you know? Factor sensitive too.
Ready? Good afternoon, good evening. We thank you all for tuning in to this important community discussion, community policing forum with our esteemed panel that's here. I am Reverend Willie Wade, the founder of Difference Makers of Hot Springs. We are excited to have this dialogue this evening. Before I introduce the moderator, I would just like to share with you my thought that has led to this particular event that we're having this evening. In my thought, it said that in the wake of the recent homicide of George Floyd and the widespread protests across this country, I felt the need to make a statement of concern. We realize that no community is immune from the possibility of violence or deadly confrontation with law enforcement. Our local elected leaders would like to share their concerns on this very sensitive matter of policing the community. So often we only hear from officials after a tragic incident has occurred, or if at all. We find ourselves being reactive in response. Today, our attempt is to be proactive in addressing ways in continuing to keep our community safe and maintain a working relationship with its community members. We understand that protesting is a form of crying out to an immediate concern, but we also know that if nothing is addressed from leadership perspective, then very little is ever accomplished. We as a small community don't share the large burden of bigger metropolitan cities such as Minneapolis, New York, or even the state of Texas. But the potential for disaster can occur anywhere. We thank this leadership panel for the giving of their time, which says so much within itself. This panel of officials represent leadership that has felt the need to share their views and concerns, as well as to hear from you. It is our hope to ensure greater improvements in policing so that these type of tragic occurrences never happen in our community. At this time, I would like to introduce our moderator panel, Dr. Brian Gittens, Vice Chancellor for the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, UAMS. We're so honored to have you here with us this evening.
Thank you.
And Ms. Amber Booth-McCoy, Senior Diversity Specialist under the same umbrella of the UAMS Center for Diversity Affairs. We would like to, at this point, turn the microphone over to her, and she can in turn introduce our panel guests and this discussion.
Well, thank you for having us today. We are happy to share in this conversation with you. I think it would be much easier as we are all getting to know each other if maybe you would introduce who you are and let the panel and let the audience know, your name and your position as we continue the conversation.
So my name is Daryl Mahoney, and I'm the Garland County Judge, or the CEO of Garland County. Willie Wade and I have been friends for quite some time, and he approached me with the idea of this, and I thought it was great. We met once and discussed this, and came up with an idea of trying to educate and communicate to learn more about each other and what we see as problems, or what we've seen so far as trying to fix problems. I'm glad to be here tonight. I appreciate the opportunity to address this, and thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Bill Burrow. I'm the city manager for the city of Hot Springs, and I echo what Daryl had mentioned, and several of us up here, what we do every day in managing our city, our county, our police department, sheriff's department, school system, whatever it may be. We're lifelong residents, many of us, and this is really more than a job. It's our home. And many of the individuals that are here I've known for many, many years. And you know, I love what I do. I love being part of solutions. I think this is a great opportunity to talk about some of the great things that we're doing at both the county and the city, especially as it relates to how we police and some of the things we have in place that would really mitigate the opportunity for something happening here that we may see happen in other places in the United States. So glad to be here and look forward to the dialogue.
Thank you.
So my name is Chris Chapman. I'm the police chief here in Hot Springs, Arkansas. Lifelong residents with the short absence of a couple years here recently, but glad to be back home and very proud to be having this discussion tonight. I believe that every police chief across America should be sitting down at the table having these discussions, not only to educate the public on what we are doing, but to listen and understand the concerns of those around us and those that we serve. So looking forward to the conversation. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
My name is Mike McCormick. I'm the Garland County Sheriff, and it is truly my honor to be here this evening. We work hard every single day to do the right thing, and we want every opportunity to do better and better and better to serve Garland County and Hot Springs and make this one of the greatest places to live on the earth.
I'm Elmer Beard, enlisted this evening as a community advocate, a lifelong member of the NAACP, and I serve presently as a member of the Garland County Election Commission. Brother Wade asked me to serve, and I didn't know how to say no, and I'm proud to be here so that I can continue to learn.
Thank you.
I'm Dr. Stephanie Nehu, Superintendent of Hot Springs School District, and thankful to be invited to be around the table to talk from the education perspective and from the community's perspective, having grown up here, loving our community, loving our children, and loving all those here and wanting to be part of the solution to make sure everyone feels comfortable where we are. And we have one member on the phone. It's your turn.
Thank you. Yes, Rob Gershon. I'm the Executive Director of Ouachita Behavioral Health and Wellness. We're the Community Mental Health Center for the 5-county region in the south central part of the state. Happy to be part of this esteemed panel. Our mission of our organization is to improve the health and well-being of our communities, and this discussion really is very much consistent with our mission to not only serve the mental health and substance abuse needs of our community, but to improve the overall health and well-being. So I'm happy to participate in this panel discussion, and thank you all very much.
Thank you. Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you so much for those introductions. So you might be asking yourself, why is UMS here, right? Well, when you think about these notions of social justice, it's a public health issue, okay? One of the biggest predictors of your healthcare outcomes is how you look, ethnicity, and your zip code, okay? Biggest predictors of healthcare outcomes and public health outcomes as well. And when we think about this issue of social justice, we have such a diverse group of panelists because it's a complex, diverse issue. It spans everywhere, anything from the community at large, to education in schools, to mental health, to policy and public policy, as well as policing. It's not just policing. I want to stress that, okay? Because there's a whole continuum there. And I think that it involves partnerships like this in order to resolve. And I love the fact that we're being proactive here, that we're not reacting to a crisis so that we aren't caught flat-footed, right? And positioned to address contingencies. So that's my former Marine sort of me coming out there, all right? Let's talk about the format of the panel. So we're going to ask a series of questions, and we're going to have primary panelists that the direct questions will be asked of. And each panelist will get 2 minutes to address the question, okay? Feel free to yield your time as well to other panelists. Then we'll open it up to the other panelists to discuss for another 5 minutes or so before we move to the next question or category of questions. Does that make sense? Okay. And so without further ado, I'll turn it over to my colleague, Ms. Amber Nicole Booth,
McCoy. Yes.
and she'll start us off here.
Thank you. And like Dr. Gittens just said, I want to thank you for all being here tonight. This is a very necessary conversation for every city in America. And like Reverend Wade said, there are protests, there are things happening right now. This is the largest civil rights movement we've seen in history. We have 18 countries or more around the world standing with America right now in solidarity saying we need to do something. So as leaders in this community, what do you see as your role as an ally for underrepresented minorities or voices that you can assist in amplifying in your role?
And that's directed to each of the panelists.
Everyone,
Yeah.
yes. As a leader, what is your role or how can you be an advocate for underrepresented minorities in this city and in your community?
So I'll take that first. I think that trying to make sure that everyone has the same opportunity and trying to make sure that we don't get caught up in the issues that we're seeing around the country. What we're doing tonight, I think, is the first step. You know, I had a good conversation, and we all had a good conversation about a month ago, I guess it was, at a lunch table that led us to, and my motto of it is educate and communicate, because I don't have all the answers, but I can learn from things like this. I can learn from my neighbors, and as Bill said earlier, I have a huge investment personally in this community. My heart is here. I grew up here. I was in the private sector here. And I have a bunch of friends here, and I never look at the race or anything that separates me from them. But we have to be able to provide the opportunity, the same opportunity for anyone, no matter the race, no matter the financial backing. We have to be able to provide that, and that's my goal, to make sure that we have a good opportunity for everyone in Garland County, and also to support our fair policing activities. That I know the sheriff, he's a good man. I know what he has in place, and my goal is also to support him in the manner that he needs to be supported.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, I think, you know, that's a very good question. Are we all answering the same question?
Everybody's going to answer the question.
Everyone.
Well, that, you know, I think that was a good question. As a leader in the community, you know, we're in a position to facilitate change. And we do that by listening, by having these type meetings, by being involved in the community. We've been very involved in many organizations, especially with the time period after the George Floyd tragedy. And, you know, we've seen the Stop the Violence coalitions happen. We've seen unity coalitions happen that we meet every week. And I can tell you that we hear things in some of these meetings that are eye-openers that maybe we knew but didn't really recognize. But I think we're in a unique position to be able to help facilitate that change. And to do that, you have to be open and honest and recognize that not everybody is treated the same. You know, there are times where that could be race, it could be religion, it could be social path, it could be whatever it may be. But those things do happen in communities, and I think, I don't know that we'll ever eradicate it completely, but I think it's that goal that we always have to be looking at and be open, and as a leader being able to help facilitate that.
Thank you for your transparency.
Go ahead.
Thank you. I mean, I've got pages and pages of notes that I could talk on that, just that one question would take our whole hour up. But as a leader, not only in the community, but in the law enforcement community, you know, it's my responsibility and the sheriff's responsibility and the leaders of our organizations to ensure that we're policing our communities in a fair and equitable way. And that means holding ourselves to the highest standards. That means that we need our officers to be approachable. We need our officers to see, to understand the importance of training, of de-escalation tactics and bias-based policing, and understand that regardless of who we are, we do have those biases, those implicit biases. So continuing to train, identify areas where we succeed and celebrate those victories, but also admit where we're making mistakes and learn from those mistakes so we can move forward. So it's important as not only just a leader in the community, but as an organization that is charged with enforcement of our laws to make sure we're holding ourselves to the very highest standards and listening to those around us. And again, I think that's the importance of this tonight, is to have those conversations.
Thank you. You know, anytime you throw out the words like bias and equity to diversity people, we get real excited.
Do
it again. Do it again.
I think the first thing that I would throw out there is to be intolerant to intolerance. Because if you don't take that role, you come across as accepting as things are. And we are in a time of change. And if you're not on that bandwagon, you're going to be falling behind. It's also extremely important to pay attention to what you say and how you say it. I'm talking to Mr. Beard earlier this evening. He pointed out how we are all growing, and I made the same statement to him about a month ago. I have learned and grown so much within the last year or so, and I think a lot of people are falling within that category too. Another important thing is to accept correction. I make mistakes. I try to keep them to a minimum, but I'm a human being, and that goes along with the learning. Seek out the marginalized voices. So often they're overlooked, and their input is so important to our community, to making the right decisions, to making everybody equal. And the last one I would say is educating the community. And it's something that I've been involved in for almost 40 years in law enforcement in our local community, whether it's been working within the school systems, or talking to people out on the streets, or to the law enforcement personnel that I've worked with over the years. So it certainly is a multitude of factors.
Sure. So Sheriff McCormick, so again, as Amber was pointing out, when we hear words like equity and things like this excited, I get less excited when I hear words like tolerance. And so I just wanted to take this opportunity to perhaps maybe we can change that narrative a little bit, because tolerance seems to indicate that you are enduring something that's negative, as opposed to embracing something or celebrating something. So the hope is that we will move this conversation where we're not tolerating people that are different, but we're actually embracing them and celebrating those folks as well. But I love the points that you brought up. Certainly appreciate it.
Well, I was going to tell him, it sounds like you all got it all together.
They got
We
a
can
lot
just
of
go.
it.
Like, I mean,
I want to make one point about conversations and the need to communicate with each other. In our community, if we believe that not discussing racism will cause it to go away, we're making a very serious mistake. It won't go away. We should be open and honest with ourselves and try to grow each day and realize that we live in a country that has a history of becoming as wealthy and as rich and progressive as it has become as a result of what happened in 1619 and what happened in 1865 and the list of years that had an influence on where we are today is a very long list. And when we admit that and make progress from it, we're making progress overall.
Absolutely. Thanks so much.
thank you.
I think from the education standpoint, we have to host the conversation, and especially for our youth, we have to listen. We have to hear their voice. We as adults have to realize the world we grew up in is very different than the world that our children are growing up in, and we want their world to be different. We want to learn from history. We want to make sure it doesn't repeat itself, and we want to make sure that everyone feels safe and included in all conversations. I'm blessed to sit next to a good friend of mine who taught me a phrase. He knows I'm going to say it because I say it almost every time we're around each other. But here in Garland County, we're still under a desegregation agreement. And that, in and of itself, just terminology, leads to some negative thoughts and feelings. And so we had a conversation one day, and it's changed my thought to intentional integration. That being race, that being gender, that being any marginalized group. And so how can we intentionally integrate all, again, making everyone feel welcome and accepted and respected? I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Gershon.
Yeah, thank you. From the mental health perspective, you know, we decide what kind of societies and culture we live in. Do we want a healthy and just culture that people have opportunities to all the advantages that many of us have gotten used to, but many of us have been denied those opportunities? One of the things that I think COVID has revealed to us is the disconnect between the ideals and the values our society is based upon and the realities that many people have been dealing with for long periods of time. A gentleman said, for example, about talking about racism reminds me of the same discussions in my field. We talk about, people used to say you shouldn't talk about suicide because then people might be more likely to act upon that. When you really talked about people who are suicidal or make suicidal acts, one of the things they talk about all the time is because there's such ambivalence about it. If somebody was just willing to take the time and energy to talk to them, to ask them how they're doing, that interest, that level of caring might have made all the difference in the world. I think that's where we are as a society. We need to listen, we need to learn, we need to work together, and we need to make sure that we're working together to create the kind of society we want for ourselves, our children, and our children's children. It's going to be a lot of hard work. It's going to take some time. But events like this opens up the door for having these discussions. And the last thing I want to say is about being a leader. Anybody can be a leader. All it takes to be a leader is to be committed, to be involved, to speak up, and to basically find a way to realize one's dreams. And anybody can lead from any position of life. So this is one of those opportunities where everybody needs to step up and be a leader to deal with this issue that has gone on way, way too long in our society.
Thank you so much. And I'm, again, just echoing that this conversation is necessary, and I'm very excited about having this conversation and what you guys are saying, as well as the fact that, echoing what Sheriff McCormick said, that in the past year, you were saying that you've learned so much, and I bet that that growth wasn't always comfortable, but if we can commit to sometimes being uncomfortable, we can get further as a society because we're going to share the discomfort instead of that discomfort being placed on vulnerable populations like it most often is. So.
Again, we have some tremendous talent in the room. Listening to, obviously, the panelists have thought a lot about it, and that's the first step, right? In terms of this introspective perspective. Then we start to have conversations like this. That leads us to sort of the next category of questions regarding advocacy and sort of public policy. And the primary panelists I'm going to direct this towards is our Mr. Beard, Mr. Burrow, and Judge Mahoney. So can each of you share advice for being advocates in our community, whether through grassroots organizing, municipal policy, or through legislative enforcement? How can we move from conversations like this to policy change?
I believe that it's going to take several conversations like this. This is a starting point for us. I don't have all the answers. It's going to require community involvement. It's going to require feedback from absolutely everyone that we can talk to. You know, it's Mr. Wade and I can exchange ideas and we can exchange conversation, but there's going to be somebody that gets left out if we don't reach out to absolutely everyone. Our community is unique. We have a little bit of everything here. We have a melting pot, if you will. I think that the only way to move forward is to involve absolutely everyone. And at that point, you find out what your weaknesses are. You find out what you're doing wrong. You make those corrections, and then you can learn to be an advocate from that. Like I say, I don't have all the answers, and I know there's things we can do better. But pinpointing those and learning the right path will be the first step to getting towards to be a good advocate for this.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Adding voices to the table, definitely. Bringing more people. You don't have to know all the answers if you bring other people that have answers as well.
It's been my experience to notice that depending on the person and his status in the community as to the kind of consideration he or she gets when there is some case of discrimination. And if we would admit that we sometimes have classes of people and that we should not, and confess to ourselves that in making these differences in people, we are saying that there are groups who are better or above others, and we should disdain that. Otherwise, when we attend church and we study our scriptures we are completely being hypocritical regarding what we have been taught.
Thank you.
You know, I truly believe that a lot of change does start with grassroots efforts. And I mentioned the Unity Coalition and the Stop the Violence Coalition. And it's getting people together in a room and talking about the issues that really have an impact. And then taking those and finding a way to meld those into a policy change. But I think that first step is that grassroots effort in being present. Not just showing up, not just sitting at the table and saying I was at that meeting, but being present, being part of the meeting and having those dialogues and discussion, because things do come up that you're going to think differently than I do. And as we discuss each point of view, we're going to change each other's minds, or we're going to be able to at least know where the other person is coming from and being able to respect that. And, you know, thank God that we're different. You know, I mean, we need that. We need that type of inclusion. So, you know, I think it starts grassroots, and you start getting people in there, discussing the issues, and then formulating what needs to be changed, because not everything needs to be changed.
Sure.
You need to focus on what needs to be changed and try to make an impact.
So, Mr. Burrow, again, I'm new to Arkansas and obviously new to Hot Springs. So, can you provide some examples of where that's been successful? Maybe, you know, really speaking to the audience out there who want to know, okay, are they really listening or not? So we'd like to give folks hope that if they actually say something, these grassroots efforts can actually materialize and change from your perspective.
Well, again, you know, I think you have to identify what needs to be changed. I think sometimes you go into some of the meetings and you may be hearing something that you don't see as a problem that's a problem to somebody else. And I was in a meeting actually yesterday with one of the reverends here in town, and he said, you know, what I don't want to do, Stephanie, I think you and Chris were there, you know, what we don't want to do is waste anyone's time. And so we don't want to fabricate a problem that doesn't exist. We want to pinpoint and identify what problem does exist, and then put an all hands on deck on how we're going to solve that. And I think that happens as you have those kind of dialogues. You're able to go in front of whether it's a city board or a quorum court or a school board or whatever it may be, and go, you know, this is a change that we recommend, and having your facts together and the support behind it to see that become part of a policy.
Okay, thank you for that.
And I think it is that level of intentionality that makes the difference. I tell everyone, as a diversity specialist, I don't need you to agree with me. I just want you to hear me. So it's like you were saying, everyone doesn't mean we need to change every policy. It doesn't mean we need to change every law, but I need you to hear my experience, or the experience that comes along with that law as it stands. So.
If I might add to that, you know, something you just said there rang home. A lot of times, like Bill said, you don't realize there's a problem. You don't perceive it as a problem. But when you hear the perspective, when you just said, I just want you to hear me. You don't have to agree with me. I want you to hear me. And that's what it's all about. And the more diverse group we can get to speak out and listen to, the more ideas we'll be able to capture and move forward.
Right. I think that Chief McCoy mentioned this notion of openness before. Openness to new people, openness to new ideas, openness to new possibilities. So, thanks.
And it was for those three panelists. Are there any other panelists that would like to share on this question as it relates to advocacy and policy?
Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, the sheriff and I both are responsible for upholding our agencies to best practice policies in our profession. And so we have as much authority to write and change policy as anyone at the table, so to speak. And it is our responsibility as law enforcement officers to do the same thing, to identify areas where we come up short. A perfect example, you know, post George Floyd, the duty to intervene. That topic came up over and over and over again. And so as a policy manager, as a law enforcement leader, you begin to look at your own policies. Do we address that? Yes, we address it in our code of conduct. That's what we should do. But is it in our use of force policy? And what we found out is that it wasn't. We didn't have that duty to intervene in our use of force policy or a standalone policy, which we've implemented. That needs to be in every policy book across the country.
Sure. And I know that most people may know what duty to intervene means, but could you expand on that a little bit?
Well, absolutely. So you take the George Floyd incident, as tragic as that was, the killing of George Floyd, but what you also saw is 3-4 other officers standing there and doing nothing. And so the duty to intervene is demanding that when the officers see something being done unjust or unlawfully, the use of force is beyond where it needs to be, is they have the authority and the mandate to intervene. So it's just as important for the sheriff and I and Dr. Nahus to review our own policies and ensure that we're holding our officers and our employees to the highest standards, and then we're holding them accountable. Set the expectation of doing the right thing, holding yourself and those around you accountable for their actions. So I think it's just as important for us to do that as well.
Thanks, Chief Brian. Appreciate it.
And we've seen a lot of the 8 can wait in regards to the use of.
So let's get to that part.
Yeah.
Let's get to that part.
Okay.
Right. Other
If
responses?
I can make a comment real quick. We've talked about the openness within the community. And this is something that has been worked on and we've progressed with over many, many years. And that is why I believe our community is so far ahead of the curve of so many other communities throughout the United States.
Appreciate that.
I echo that because I did my homework before coming, and you guys definitely have a nice track record of.
I just want to add, since Chief Chapman brought it up, Hot Springs School District and several of our school districts in our community have established institutional law enforcement agencies. And so we technically have the Hot Springs School District Police Department with our own chief. And, you know, that's something that, again, I think is something very proactive in our community, knowing that we have to all work together and also knowing the limitations that our sheriff's office and our police department have on protecting our community. So we have that great partnership that we do have to make sure our policies are all in line together, and that we're all working together to ensure that we're protecting all citizens. You know, our responsibility is to protect the youth, but we have to do that in partnership because our youth are out in our community, and so we have to make sure that's consistent.
And does Dr. Gershon want to weigh in?
Dr. Gershon, do you have anything to say?
This question? Okay. All right. Amber?
Kind of speaking to what you were talking about, is having to partner the education and the police department. And we are talking about often communities that may have some mistrust when it comes to law enforcement. So how do you go about building relationships with those students in those schools along with this? Can you tell us more, I guess, about those partnerships and how you build those relationships?
Who are you directing that towards?
The sheriff and chief
And superintendent?
and superintendent.
Right.
Yes.
This is something that we've been working hard on, once again, for 30 plus years. It started well before the DARE program, but back in the mid to late 80s, we had the DARE program, Drug Abuse Resistance Education Program, where a uniform officer actually went into the school district and spent a tremendous amount of time with the kids. We've continued on with school resource officers, and following the community-oriented policing roadmap. It's not just our school resource officers and our DARE officers, it's every single officer that is out there. It goes out of his way to interact with the community, with the children, playing basketball, if that's appropriate. We have all kinds of events throughout the year that the youth of our community are invited to. So we make a tremendous effort in that, and it's been pretty successful. And once again, it plays into that openness that I talked about earlier.
Outstanding. So building those relationships, incredibly important.
Yeah, I agree. It goes well beyond the school. You know, one of the things that we encourage our officers to do is to be approachable. You know, don't be the bad guy, so to speak, in anyone's eyes. You know, be completely approachable. Roll your window down when you drive through the neighborhood. Speak to people. Have conversations. And you know, we truly believe in the community policing concept. And you know, a lot of people don't realize that policing is a partnership between the community and the policing element. And so you have to have those relationships with those citizens, and you're not going to have relationships unless you're having conversations.
Right.
And if you're not having conversations, you're not going to know what the issues are. So we make an effort to have those conversations, whether they're on a street corner or a basketball court or walking down the aisle in Walmart when a parent says, well, he's going to take you to jail. And taking the time to have the conversation with that parent and that child to explain that's not who we are. You know, so there's always a hurdle, but we're willing to fight that and to have those conversations. So it's an everyday issue. We work on that every single day.
And if I may, before, we're talking about adverse childhood experiences, and that we know children in Arkansas have a higher prevalence of the adverse childhood experience, such as neglect and abuse and things like that. How can, in your role, and especially Dr. Gershon, if he can assist in sharing or educating us a little more on what is the information, I guess, that he can share with our officers to better assist children that are affected by those ACEs?
Yeah, what happens when we don't do it well? Okay.
No, I did not.
Would you repeat so I can repeat for him?
We're talking about our children, as far as the children that are experiencing a higher number of ACEs than, you know, the national average, and how that plays out as far as health outcomes and even their behavior. Well, how can, in your role as a superintendent and Dr. Gershon's role, assist law enforcement in helping those students?
We're coordinating here. I think, you know, from the education perspective, and I know it's, again, I'm going to speak on behalf of the 7 school districts here in Garland County. You know, we have great partnerships, and we invite officers out. You know, the start of the school year, every year, we have officers out opening car doors, and that's in the county and that's in the city. You know, we partner with the city police department to offer our property, to offer them to walk through the building, to sit in an office and handle any paperwork that they might need to handle, just so that they're there, they're visible, and that our students do see them in a positive light. And then, you know, we encourage those conversations, and I think that's something that we do well here in Garland County, is give opportunities for our children and our law enforcement to interact in a positive way. To hopefully avoid the situations where it becomes negative. I'm going to let Dr. Gershon.
Yeah, adverse childhood events is a significant problem in our county and our state across the country. Unfortunately, we have a growing number of families and children who are experiencing trauma at very young ages. Those traumas can be related to neglect, abuse, deprivation, a variety of different factors. And the real issues with it is not only the trauma itself, but basically it creates a lifelong pattern where individuals who at a very young age experience trauma don't have the opportunity to live a fulfilled life. They will have literally neurocognitive changes in their brain. It affects their development. It affects their ability to have successful interpersonal relationships. It affects their vocational choices and outcomes. We need to do everything we can to do a better job of, once again, to work with parents and with families to minimize trauma and create healthy environments for children to grow up in. The other thing that concerns me a lot is the position we put law enforcement in often to deal with victims of trauma or to deal with individuals with mental health and substance abuse problems. Police officers, sheriff's department, police officers really don't have the training or by the disposition really to deal with those situations, but unfortunately they're really in situations that they're often become the first level of contact with many people who are underserved in the community who have mental health and substance abuse issues, and that's something we really need to work on and improve. We need to figure out a way not only to help police officers and help citizens have a better outcome when they have mental health and substance abuse problems when they come to the attention of law enforcement, but more importantly, we need to provide community-based programs at both the prevention and treatment level to deal with those individuals who are having mental health and substance abuse problems so they never come to the attention of law enforcement. The other thing that was said earlier by one of the speakers really about how your life outcomes is really based on your zip code, and that's really true. You know, social determinants of health, where you live, poverty, a variety of different factors, basically are highly predictive of your health status. And one of the things we need to do as a society, one of the things we're talking about, is we need to basically improve the overall health status of individuals so they don't have these problems, and we basically create a health healthy and just society for everybody, and we need to really focus on these social determinants of health, which are usually impactful about how healthy our communities are and how healthy individuals are, and how basically people have the opportunity to live a satisfying, fulfilled existence. So the truth is that adverse childhood events is something we all need to be aware of. We need to do everything we can to reduce trauma, and we need to do everything we can to work with families, make sure that they're as healthy, and we can provide all the levels of support we possibly can to minimize and avoid children having those experiences, because they have lifelong consequences.
Thank you.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Go ahead.
So, go ahead.
Dr. Newhouse, are your counselors currently screening for ACEs? And I know you're going to jump in on the ACEs as well, but before, are you currently screening students, to have that information prior to disciplinary actions and things such as that?
We do, and we've tried to ensure that our educators have been trained in identifying adverse childhood experiences. And then we partner. We have school-based mental health agencies at all of our schools. And so we utilize those partners for sure to assist us anytime that we have questions or needs answered.
And as Dr. Gershon mentioned, oftentimes law enforcement get forced into these situations. And sort of, in terms of training for your officers and the like, triage, can you tell a little bit about that? If they encounter someone who's having a mental health issue, what's the protocol?
Well, can I speak to the ACE factors first?
Sure.
Because, I'm just y'all don't take this wrong, but I'm just a country boy and I'm going to preach for a minute. I'm fixing to get on a soapbox. So a portion of this is about educating the public to what we truly do. And I am very proud to say that the Sheriff's Department and the Hot Springs Police Department were part of a pilot program produced by the Criminal Justice Institute, the University of Arkansas Criminal Justice Institute, on drug endangered children. And a big part of what we spent our time on was identifying the adverse childhood indicators, the ACE factors, and how to partner with our surrounding agencies when we come across those, how to identify those children and work towards some sort of resolution in that process. And so you have a large number of your deputies and your officers who have been through this training course. We've been operating under that umbrella for 3 to 4 years now with the Criminal Justice Institute, partnering with them, affecting our children in a very positive manner, because the officers are the first ones to encounter these children. So that training was necessary to be able to identify what was the root cause of this problem, why are we here today, and then bring in the other partners and stakeholders that can help resolve those issues. So, again, our community probably doesn't realize that, but we've gone down that road. We've taken that extra step. We're one of 6 pilot counties in the state of Arkansas to be doing that and identifying those children with those needs. And it is very important to me and my officers and the deputies that are involved in that program that we continue with that, because again, if you see that 8-year-old that already has 3 or 4 of those boxes checked, the likelihood of seeing him when he's 12, when he's 18, and when he's 28 are very high. So I am proud of that. So how are our officers trained to deal with the mental health issue? We're better trained today than we ever have been, but is that where we need to be spending most of our time? That's a trick question, because we're the first ones called. The Hot Springs Police Department, again, the Sheriff's Department have a number of officers that are trained in crisis intervention. We have a very large number of officers who are actually trained the trainers, so they can take that training into their squad rooms and train the other officers and deputies on what we should be looking for and how we should de-escalate a situation when we come across that. Not all agencies have that capability, but we do, and we're proud of that. Should every officer have that training? Absolutely. Should we spend more time training our officers in the academy to deal with mental health issues since it's a growing crisis across our nation? Absolutely. But we are further along than some others. So I'm off my soapbox.
No, you're fine. I think one of the great opportunities for panels and discussions like this is to educate the community of the great work that's going on, because oftentimes it's the agitators, or others who don't see it, just believe that not enough's being done, nothing's being done. And so this is a great opportunity to make the public aware of what's being done, recognizing the fact there's still work to do, but we're not asleep at the wheel, and we're paying attention to these things. Thanks so much for that.
And Chief, before we leave the crisis intervention training, I know that there is often federal funding available if departments have officers that are trained and things, but I wasn't aware until we were going to have a panel similar to this in Little Rock that a citizen can call and ask for a crisis intervention, trained officer. Is that the same here in Hot Springs? Can you call and ask for that type of officer specifically?
Well, I'm not going to speak for the Sheriff's Department. The way we handle that is if we get a call of a person in distress, what we feel like is a potential mental issue, a mental health issue, then the officer that is trained on that shift are dispatched to that call. So it could work either way.
Okay.
We try to identify once we either get on scene or in the screening process with dispatch who we need to send to that call. Fortunately, we have officers that are assigned to each shift who are trained. That helps us. We are continually looking at getting more officers trained, but absolutely, if an individual calls and says, hey, I'm in a mental health crisis, not only are we going to send the right officer, but that's also going to prompt us to call some other stakeholders. That's very important. Identify your partners, have the relationships with your partners where you can address some of these issues jointly instead of individually.
Thank you.
One of my goals is to have all of our patrol deputies certified and qualified in crisis intervention training, and hopefully within the next couple of years that'll be in place. One of the concerns that I have, and I've had this for quite some time now, is, and this, I'm putting this out as a question more than anything, is too much expected out of law enforcement? And I think that the answer to that is yes. And as time goes on, more and more is expected out of law enforcement. And to a large degree, it's probably unrealistic to have law enforcement working towards all the objectives and goals that are demanded on them from the public, from the cities and the counties.
I think you're correct in that way. So what's the answer, though, to the question? Yes, there is a need, and yes, police officers and law enforcement have been asked to do too much. And so is there a middle ground? Is there a bridge? Is there to addressing that gap? So that's a question to the panel.
So I might add to that, and I apologize for interrupting you, but there's a pilot program in the state of Arkansas right now with crisis stabilization units.
Okay.
They've got 4 units around the state, and I believe it's Washington, Pulaski, Craighead, and Sebastian. I believe that's correct.
Yeah.
And the pilot program, I believe, was going to run for 2 years, and then they would look at doing more. The governor had made sure they were going to meet the spec, and we've met twice with Catherine Griffin from the governor's office to try to make sure that we can be on the next list.
Sure.
We want that. We need that here. And to echo what the sheriff and the chief have said, I do think that there has to be something to take the place of them trying to destabilize, to stabilize all those situations where a crisis occurs, because as everywhere in rural America, they're stretched pretty thin now. Sure. We may have 3 people patrolling the whole county tonight, and that's kind of scary when you think about it. And in order to provide the care and the expertise necessary, they're too thin to do that.
Can you give us a little more detail on what exactly that is? And secondly, for our audience out there, how can they help push that agenda and ensure it happens here in Hot Springs?
The governor appropriated money for these crisis stabilization units, and there's 4 in the pilot program, and they will see how they do to see if they can progress. Now, the last time I checked, they were all doing pretty well. I think Pulaski was still not 100%, but I think Sebastian County and Craighead County have been doing pretty well. And I know Washington County has. And I know the county judge up there, and he's doing well with that. So those crisis stabilization units will be for people that don't need to be in jail. They need to be somewhere they can get help. It's not a long-term care facility. It's someplace they can go to stabilize the crisis that's occurring in their life. Whether it's real or perceived, it's occurring in their life. And so if we can get on the next 4 that they establish, and I believe that's the program that they set forth, and of course, the pandemic kind of trumped everything and pushed things back, but we are in conversation. We had good conversations, and the sheriff has set in on last year to try to make sure that Garland County is one of the next places that we can establish one. Even though we are very close to Pulaski County, we could certainly serve as CHI does. They serve a large area. They're regional.
It's like, coincidentally, we just met with the Pulaski County Crisis Stabilization Unit last week.
Okay.
And in response to what you were saying, Sheriff, I think sometimes a lot is asked. And so the narrative of the defund the police gets this you know, like as if you're trying to break down the actual unit. But I think the message is that you send who is needed to whom is needed. If there is a mental health crisis, you send mental health professionals. If there is a, you know, and you send the professionals necessary to take care of those things. So.
And it's very difficult to differentiate at the time of the call.
Right.
You know, when a 911 call
Stabilize.
comes in, it's very difficult for that person answering the call to differentiate
Right.
who to send. And so I commend both our city police department and the sheriff's office for training their officers
Sure.
to be able to recognize that when they get there, and they can make the difference once they arrive. So I do believe, I echo what he said, I think we are way ahead. I'd like to believe we are way ahead. Nobody wants to see a shortcoming in anything they do, but I really honestly feel like we are way ahead, and the conversations that we have through these meetings will help to promote that.
Dr. Griffin.
Yeah, a couple things I'd like to jump in is, yes, we absolutely are asking too much of our officers to do. We know a significant number of the individuals that officers come into contact with, one way or another, have mental health and substance abuse issues. What we really need is a systematic approach in dealing with the issues that come up when individuals with mental health and substance abuse problems interface with the legal system. The sequential intercept model is a very nice framework, which is fairly comprehensive, that involves the various kind of inflection points where individuals come into access with law enforcement, whether it's at the court level, the officer level, the reentry level, crisis stabilization level. And one of the things I would like to see us do is really kind of embrace sequential intercept, kind of do community needs assessment, see where the gaps are, and really put together a comprehensive program. One of the things I met with Mike McCormick and Jason Lawrence a couple of weeks ago, might even be longer now, there's a couple pilot programs around the country where the Quorum Court has basically dedicated some dollars to send out social workers and EMTs on certain calls to deal with mental health crises in such a way that it relieves the duties and obligations on police officers, even though there has to be some backup for doing it. And they're getting some really good results, and not only basically deflecting people away from being incarcerated and getting them into treatment, but it was reducing a lot of burden and costs on the jail level, reducing injuries. So there's a whole continuing conversation we need to have about this issue. And honestly, a lot of the issues that we have when we do have these violent episodes that can occur between law enforcement individuals really has to do with mental health and substance abuse issues. So I think this is an important conversation for us to keep having, and we really need to kind of continue to talk about it, putting together a comprehensive system to deal with it over the long haul, because that model exists. We just need to have the will and the stick-with-itness, if you will, to kind of see it through to create a system that we get much better outcomes. I think everybody's well-intentioned, but I think that we need to do a better job on the organization level to kind of find some sustainable solutions in dealing with this ongoing challenge in our community and communities across the state and country.
Thank you.
Can I add something to that, please?
Absolutely.
So we're talking about crisis intervention, but I also think it's important with our communities, but I also think it's important to have the conversation about identifying our own employees who are dealing with crisis. Because if you have an employee who is dealing with a crisis, then the likelihood of them making a mistake out on the street is very high. So as an agency, as a law enforcement agency, as a leader of an organization that deals with one critical incident after another, we have to have the programs in place internally, an overall wellness program to assist our employees and our officers during those times of crisis. And we have to be able to identify that, whether it's peer-to-peer counseling sessions, having personnel trained to help identify that, whether it's a robust physical fitness program that ensures your officers in top physical health, having a strong chaplains program to address the spiritual issues. Law enforcement has evolved, and we need to be looking at that aspect of it. For so much of my career, and probably Mike's, many of those aspects were overlooked. And so it's not just our community that's in crisis, but it's also many of our own officers, and we have to be prepared to address that.
All right, and I'll go ahead and address the elephant in the room with regard to just the reputation, if you will, of law enforcement, given the issues that are going on nationally. And I'm very sensitive to that as well. I mean, and it's something we're addressing on campus in our own police department as well, is trying to, how do we elevate their status? I think it's continue to have conversations like this, continue to show that you're both empathetic and responsive to the needs of the community, and you're out here every day doing the best job you can. So I appreciate that. We talk about growth, we talk about development as well. I think you may have mentioned implicit bias training, and it's just something, again, that gets Amber and I very, very excited because we train in that space all the time, and we talk about that. And just for folks in the room or folks in the audience who may not know what that is, so there's implicit bias, right? Then there's just bias, right? That's you making some conscious decisions about, judgments and things like that. But we're talking about implicit bias. We're talking about these judgments and assessments that you make without awareness, intention, or control. We all come from different places. We have different value systems, different messaging, different, we've learned different things and create these different associations. So we have assumptions about people. We see one or two things and we want to put them in a box and pretend that we know the whole narrative or story and around them. We do that as people, regardless of your expression of diversity, regardless of how you look, we do it. As an African-American male, I got biases, right? Amber is an African-American woman, et cetera, et cetera. So what we're trying to get at is what Chief Chaplain mentioned earlier, is this level of openness to how do we set those things aside and focus on what's really important, focus on the issues at hand and try to suspend those judgments. So we focus on what's important, whether we're talking about hiring, whether we're talking about policing, whether we're talking about engaging communities and making assumptions about them based on one or two factors. So what sort of work is being done with regard to policing, at least, in terms of unconscious bias and mitigating the impacts of that? Again, we're talking about the development of your officers.
One thing I'd like to start off with, I think the harder you look at the local law enforcement agencies, in particular the Sheriff's Office and the Hot Springs Police Department, the better we look and the more clear it is that we are trying so terribly hard to do the right thing every single day. And it's a sustained effort that we're all making. And I feel comfortable saying that about the police department. We have zero tolerance at an administrative level towards any type of prejudicial behavior. And that's very clear. We've got policies in place. Our culture will not accept it within the Sheriff's Department. And when it comes to our attention that there is a possibility something occurred, we are all over it. We will not tolerate it on any level. This is my home too. I've lived here for, I think I moved here when I was 21 years old, and I'm 40 now? Something like that. So I've lived here, bottom line, I've lived here a long time, and this is my home, and I want everybody treated with respect. But, and I tell my officers this, I will not tolerate you treating anyone out in that community disrespectful. But I expect my officers, my deputies, to be treated with respect too. So it's very much a two-way street.
And, go ahead.
Go ahead.
So, a number of years ago when you mentioned the word implicit bias, it was just, what are you talking about? So I do feel like we were ahead of the curve under the previous administration, and I was the assistant police chief at the time. About 5 years ago, we actually brought in our first trainer to train our officers in de-escalation tactics and implicit bias, bias-based policing. And it was a foreign concept. Well, now I'm proud to say that it's mandatory training, mandatory annual training, because people don't realize some of the implicit bias issues that we all have. They don't understand that unless you educate them on it. So we now have a workforce, a police department, a sheriff's department that is educated in what that means, what to look for, how to address those issues. Chief Emmett Jackson, he's the police chief in Keene, Texas, former Dallas PD officer. He's a subject matter expert in implicit bias de-escalation tactics. He'll be here in late September, October at the Hot Springs Police Department teaching 6 classes. Every employee that gets a paycheck from the City of Hot Springs Police Department will go through that training, from our civilian staff who answers the phone calls, our dispatchers, to our police officers. And I believe in that training. I believe that it continues to push us towards the next level of professional policing in the state of Arkansas. I feel that with the reform movement, that will be something that will be mandated across the board. And unfortunately, again, we're ahead of the curve, and I'm proud to say that. And I know that our officers have a totally different understanding on it. Matter of fact, I have a bias-based policing policy that is probably not necessarily in every agency across our country. So we take it serious. We understand the issue, and we're working towards being better every single day.
Thanks for sharing that.
And we put that policy back in place in 2015. So again, that's when those conversations, a lot of them were very foreign.
It's just for the other panelists, I'll let an opportunity for you to respond to that question with regard to your impressions of unconscious bias training and its need in regard to policing.
Well, in education.
I want to come from it from the education standpoint, if I can. We just brought in a trainer to do professional development with our administrators on cultural proficiency. And it was a wonderful conversation. And we talked a lot about microaggressions. And, you know, some of those terms I hadn't even considered or even heard of. And, you know, we talked about micro insults, micro assaults, and micro invalidations. And, you know, it was very eye-opening for all of us. And one of the other pieces that I think it's important to talk about is our systems. And that's something we're here talking about today, and what can we do as a community. And I'm going to share just a couple of things from our training. A system is a set of things working together as parts of a mechanism or an interconnecting network. It will do exactly what it's designed to do. And W.E.B. Du Bois said, a system cannot fail those it was never intended to protect. And so we began those conversations to say, how can we disrupt our system that was established years ago, that if we continue to just do what we've always done, we're allowing these issues that we're dealing with just continue without addressing them. And so, you know, that's something we're doing in our educational system, is hosting the conversations, beginning the education piece of it. How can we be culturally proficient educators, and how can we help others through the education process? And so we're bringing our trainer back to all of our buildings to train our teachers. And then my next step was, what can we bring to our kids to start the conversation there, to disrupt the system in a positive way, to be more inclusive.
Thank you.
You know, I smile when I say that, and she knows it because in my trainings I talk about systems. I think Deming actually has a quote with regard to people talk about the system. We need to, you know, the system's broken, etc. The system's not broken. The system is working just the way it was designed, and that's to protect some and keep others out. So we have to disrupt or create a new system in that way. So anyways, that's an opportunity to, I think it's a great training then. So.
One, as someone who sits on a city commission and is active in municipal affairs, I'm excited by this conversation. We talk a lot about community policing, but you all just sound like community. Involving the educators in law enforcement, being able to recognize ACEs, you know, in resource officers, being able to have the city manager have conversations about how this affects children and who should be sent out to mental health. So because you all are doing such an awesome job, right, what advice would you give in your individual lane as far as those wraparound services that you've even talked about, as far as protecting the community or even vulnerable populations such as your children? What would you give those in your field? What advice would you give to them, you know, that are listening? Like, what should other superintendents know that you're doing? Are you implementing restorative justice practices? Are you taking your disciplinary rates and, you know, kind of going through them with a fine-tooth comb? What else is going on behind the scenes that you think they should know?
It's a great opportunity too.
I'll start. You know, we are implementing Capturing Kids' Hearts. It's a national program that focuses on relationships, building relationships and those types of things. We are doing the training on cultural proficiency, which I think is critical. And then, you know, really my advice is talking about it. You know, Mr. Beard and I have had lots of conversations. If you don't talk about it, then you aren't addressing or changing anything. And so we have to host the conversations to make any change possible. And so I think that's the biggest advice, is to really look in, through our training. We are going to dig a lot deeper into our data. We are going to look at our discipline data. We are going to look at it by race, by gender, by grade, by socioeconomic status, by all of those things, to see if we've missed something that we can change to make better. Again, it's all about disrupting the system, and you have to be willing to jump in and do it.
Outstanding. Thanks so much.
This is my heart smiling. Yes.
I'll make a statement. In our conversation, if we become acclimated to making use in our community, law enforcement and education, of our local people, in addition to those people that we bring in from out of town with advanced degrees who have not lived among us in the community, we could see some measurable progress in most of what we are advocating here. That would be my recommendation, so that we can measure our progress by getting some examples of the kind of things that are shared with us in these workshops when we bring those specialists in from other places. And they need to come. We need them. But when we can identify with folks that we meet in the hours at Walmart, we can relate to reality.
Outstanding.
Thank you.
I like that dashboard approach. And so how are we doing in tracking that progress over time?
Perspective, we're doing what a lot of y'all have talked about. Is we're forming a diversity, equity, and inclusion committee, and we're really going to be looking at two different things. One, we're going to be looking at health disparities. I mean, one of the big issues for us and for society as a whole is, how do we deal with disparities in healthcare, and what are the reasons that we have such an issue with disparity, and what are the kind of steps we can take to kind of start to resolve and recognize that. And the other part of that is kind of looking internally, organizationally, look at our policies, look at our procedures, look at our culture. So we're going to be taking many of the steps that you all have talked about, and it's just a really important thing for us as leaders to really be able to talk with our communities, and talk with our staff, and talk with our consumers about doing everything we can to address the inequities in our society, and take a hard look at what we're doing. And someone has said this, and to use kind of data and surveys and other information from the community and internally to kind of do a bit of a gut check about how we're doing and if we're really making progress.
Sounds like he needs to be on the UAMS campus.
There you go.
Right?
We need help.
Right.
And my comments on this are fairly short. These issues don't go away by themselves. They've got to be addressed. And a lot of our communities, such as Minneapolis, Atlanta, I think to a degree, there's some burying heads in the sand, hoping they'll go away. They don't go away. They, in fact, get worse. Address the issues as they come up. You've got to start somewhere if you expect any change.
Right. Intentionality that we talked about, right?
So my advice to anyone that's listening is that, one, I don't believe any of the issues that we're talking about tonight can be solved individually by any organization sitting at this table. I believe in the silo theory. We all live in our own little silos, and we've got to stop doing that. We've got to stop thinking that our problems can be solved through just the work of the police department or just the work of the school system. To address these changes that we all want, it truly takes a partnership. I'm very proud of the relationships that we have in Garland County, not just with law enforcement, but with our school and with our community partners. But those need to continue to grow for us to truly affect the change that we're all talking about. Because if we don't build those relationships, continue to improve upon those relationships, identify other stakeholders that we need to bring to the table, we're simply just going to talk about it. And I'm kind of tired of talking about it.
There you go. Appreciate it.
I don't know about Dr. Gittens, but I'm about one answer away from just moving to Hot Springs.
There you go.
So
There you go. There you
it's
go.
really, it's a lot of pressure on you. You are going to determine whether I just pack up and move.
Mr. Burrow?
Mr. Burrows?
We're addressing,
Oh.
did you catch the question?
Yeah.
Okay. Go ahead. Remember the question?
Oh, what advice would you give? Because you all are making progress in so many areas, and it is a community in which you're trying to make those efforts, what advice would you give to your colleagues in the field about what you're trying to do and what they should do, practices that they should.
Best practices, yeah.
Well, first I think you've got to share those best practices. And again, it goes back to working with so many different groups that are versatile. And we do a really good job of that. I mean, I've heard the police chief and the sheriff, and I can tell you that Daryl and I, we talk every day, and we work and we think about what's best for our community, not just what's best for the county or what's best for the city, but as our community. I think we are seeing change, and it's something that we do need to embrace. I think change has been slow. I said something the other day that, and this reference probably won't hit home with you, but it will a lot of people that are probably watching. I didn't really grow up in the Jim Crow era. I grew up with parents that grew up in the Jim Crow area, and I see these generations changing. My children, I see them today, and they don't not only point out something that's racist. They don't condone it. They're like, dude, that ain't cool. And that didn't really used to take place. For me, I didn't really know much different because we were integrated. I swam in the Webb Center pool and I swam in the JC pool. I didn't know any different. I played football on Sandwim Stadium. And I think those are great things that you need to share with people. But for best practices, I think it's doing what we're doing all of the time. I mean, we have a lot of different groups that are forming, trying to do and make change. I think it's important, though, that you don't get too many splinter groups, because if you're doing a lot of small things, you're going to end up doing a lot of small things. You need to try to bring these groups together and have some type of unison, because he can't be at every meeting. I can't be at every meeting that they want me to be at. We've got to come together and really focus again on what's the most important thing we're trying to impact and get everybody moving in that same direction. And whether that's through subcommittees in a larger group or whatever it may be, I think that's the key. And just don't give up. I am so proud of our city. I'm so proud of the efforts of so many people in our community. All of the things that Willie does, not just in this organization or in this effort, Diablo, Esther, everyone. I mean, when you're having the resource fairs, we need to be present. We need to be there. It's got to get to the point to where it's not systemic, that it's not implicit. And we all have biases. I found out I had a bias a couple of weeks ago. I didn't even know I had, until I said something and I had somebody correct me and said no, and I used the word tolerant, and it was with LBGT, and she said no, you're an ally. I go, I appreciate that. I hadn't thought about that. But those things, you do those things, and if somebody doesn't point it out, you don't learn and you don't grow. But I think we're doing the right thing in Hot Springs and Garland County, and can we do more? I think so. And Mr. Beard, he's always someone that and Mr. Watkins, those are two individuals that I know if I really need to understand something, that I can go to him, and I can go to Miss Franklin, and I can go to Bill Watkins, and I'm not afraid to go. I spent an hour with Bill just a couple of weeks ago, so I could understand something that I didn't understand, and we just have to be open.
Those conversations are so important. Even when they're uncomfortable, they're important conversations and necessary. And I guess that's it, Mom. I'm moving to Hot Springs. So.
There you go. So you're bringing home Judge Mahoney.
So, there's a little history here. A couple of years ago, we probably couldn't have all been sitting at the same table. The previous administrations probably couldn't be sitting here without being uncomfortable. And to show that we are unified and moving forward as one, like Bill said, there's probably not a week that go by we don't talk 3 or 4 times a week to try to compare where we're at. Something, I might have a question about something I'm doing. How are you going to handle this? We want to be the same way. We want to move in the same direction. But I would encourage each person that's in my position to communicate. and not just by email or text message. Get out there on the ground and communicate. You know, I've spent my entire career in the private sector located on Malvern Avenue, and it's the heart of my livelihood, and it's right across from the library. It's in a major part of our people of color community, and I have the deepest friendships I've ever formed in that community, and that therefore I can go to anybody over there and ask a question that I don't understand, and I'm not uncomfortable going, because we have a relationship that we've already built, and I can go in there and say, help me with this, you know, help me understand this, show me where I'm wrong. And that's communication. That's something that everybody needs to be able to do, regardless of anything about them. Something else I would encourage them to do is learn to take correction. You know, when you're wrong, accept it and learn from it, and know that you're not doing everything right. Even though, you know, you can sit at home and think, man, I've done pretty good here. But all it takes is one person to show that light, turn that light on in your head, and you realize, gosh, I could have done that better. Even though we try and we strive every day to do absolute best we can for every member of our community, because they're all part of us, because we all grew up here. And the other thing is to persevere through change. You know, you need to be able to, a friend of mine always said, start out like you can stay. Don't start with a front that you cannot maintain. You start like you mean it, and you persevere through it, and you make that change. And don't be afraid to step up. If you've got an idea that you think is worthy, step up and present that idea. You know, it may get shot right back in your face, but you don't want to go home and lay down and say, maybe I should have said something about that. So I guess the biggest thing is communication and education. Like I said, it's going into this. If we can educate each other for both what we're doing right and what we're doing wrong, and communicate that, I think that's the biggest place to start, and that's the biggest hurdle to overcome, is not being able to sit down and communicate for fear of having an interaction with someone that's uncomfortable. And we are way ahead of the game, because these people are all our friends already, regardless of their color, regardless of their social status, regardless of their zip code. They're already all our friends, and we are able to sit down and say, I don't understand this, explain it to me. And I told Willie this morning in a phone conversation, I said, I'm going to blame my ignorance for this, but here's where I'm at. And he understood. I mean, it's a great feeling to be able to have that communication.
Sure.
Thank you.
I'm going to say just a couple of words, and I'll have Amber close this out, but I just want to say thank you for educating me about all the great things that are going on here in Garland County and Hot Springs. And secondly, for getting me excited about the possibilities of, sometimes you read things and you see things in the news, you think everybody's at odds and things like that, but you're giving me hope that to see that people from different lanes, where we're talking about, you know, the judicial system, we're talking policing and education and community advocacy, can come together and solve these complex problems. As we iterated over and over again during this conversation, these are complex issues. It's not just a school issue, it's not just a police, it's not just a law enforcement issue, it's a people issue, and we're complex. And each of you touch people's lives in very different ways. But I think together we can start to improve the lives of the citizens in Garland County and Hot Springs. So thank you for that. Thanks for that shot in the arm. Amber, you gonna close this out?
Well, like you said, y'all made this diversity specialist smile. Y'all, all the inclusivity on the stage, and everything that you mentioned collectively, and experiencing individuals and not groups, being able to meet people. We know as diversity specialists that is how you get rid of bias. You stop lumping people together once you get to know them. You have to be intentional about it. These are things that all of you all have said throughout this conversation. So I know that I'm going to really enjoy living here, you know, going forward. And when it comes to encouraging uncomfortable conversations, I asked that the other day I was in Walgreens and I had my key in my hand and I picked up a bunch of stuff and I wanted to put my key in my pocket. But I was afraid that I would be looked at like I was stealing something. And so I walked around Walgreens for 15 minutes uncomfortable. But the more people have uncomfortable conversations, that's one step closer to me getting to put my key in my pocket in Walgreens if we keep having uncomfortable conversations. So thank you for everything that you shared today, for your honesty and your transparency. And this diversity specialist is going to go back to her old home, smiling today.
Very well. Appreciate it.
turn it back over to Reverend Wade.
I think this has been a very productive conversation, and I want to thank my panel for your input, for what you have provided this evening. Thank our great moderators for just how you have eloquently just brought out everything and allowed the conversation to flow very smoothly where no one feels challenged, but we're here to be educated and to learn from where we are as to where we progress to in the future. Thank you all from Facebook Live that have bothered to spend some time with us. We think this has been a productive conversation. I'd like to thank the difference makers, my executive director, Esther Dixon, Diablo, vice president there, and my wife, Lisa, for also accompanying and being a part of this. We give a great shout out to Pastor John here for the use of his facility, for just being a community partner in so many ways. I just love you and thank you, my brother. Would you like to have a word?
I just want to say we have a great community, and it's going to get even better. And there's a lot of love in this community, a lot of great people, and it's just getting it all together. I'm excited about doing our Hot Springs Community Resource Fair August 15th, Transportation Depot. A lot of us are going to be there, and we just want to be community and spend time together, love on each other. Don't bring your billfold, it's all free. So come and join us, be a part of helping the kids get back to school and helping people and just loving on people. So the churches are coming together too. We're praying. We want to be a part of the solution and have this place be the best place where God is glorified and where every person is blessed and treasured because of how special God made each and every one. So thank you, Willie Wade. All right, we're going to have our prayer. Father in heaven, you made us all one. You created us. You put us together in our mother's womb. And Lord Jesus, your blood covers us all the same. We're at the same, at the foot of the cross, and yet we're all unique and special in your eyes. And each and every one of us is special in your eyes. And we just want to live that way, in that oneness, in that uniqueness. And when one part of the body, one part of our community is hurting, we want to be there and support and love and encourage and build up. And we want to celebrate with others when there's victories in the schools and with the kids and different areas of people's lives, and be that place where your glory comes. And where people come to see there's something different. And we know it's really you inside of each and every one of us. So we ask your blessing on this conversation we had today, and give us courage to have the bold conversations that need to have to happen individually in homes and communities and neighbors at schools, so that we come to see and love each other in that unique way that each one is precious. And you bind us together as one. So we thank you and we praise you in your name, Jesus. Amen.
Oh, an applause.